Greetings and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is Carl with another episode of Karls Spirits. This is episode 58. And tonight we're going to be tasting Jeptha Creed 4-grain bourbon whiskey. This is Jeptha Creed 4-grain bourbon. And this is a straight bourbon out of Shelbyville, Kentucky. Jeptha Creed. So this is a product of, obviously, Jeptha Creed Distillery. Shelbyville, Kentucky, which is somewhat close to Lexington. It grew out of a family farm, the Netherly family farm. And they have had several generations of Netherlys on the family farm, about 1,000 acres. The most recent Netherly to call the farm home, Joyce Netherly, decided way back in 2014 to get into the spirits industry. And using their own corn as the foundation grain, Netherly planted 2 strains of corn, a non-GMO yellow corn and an antique heirloom corn known as Bloody Butcher. And in fact, here on the bottom of the bottle, Bloody Butcher. I'll tell you about Bloody Butcher very quickly. It is an heirloom corn variety. It is a red corn. Has some white flecks on the ear, and some people say this resembles a butcher's apron, hence the name. The corn itself has been grown in the Appalachians since about 1845, though some claim it has been grown far longer than that. In fact, some folks believe that this was one of the original corn varieties planted by local Native Americans in the area, maybe crossed with some early corns that came from Virginia in the first wave of settlement. And it was really in use for a very long time as both a food crop and as a livestock food crop. And Bloody Butcher then kind of fell out of favor as larger markets for plain yellow corn developed. And it's having to come back. It's having a resurgence here in recent 5 to 10 years as an heirloom species. People are planting it to keep that tradition alive in the Appalachians. And certainly this falls over into Kentucky. So beginning back in 2016, the Netherlys, under the Jeptha Creed label, actually distilled and barreled their very first legal barrel of bourbon. In fact, it was the first barrel of bourbon distilled and barreled in that county since before Prohibition. So you go all the way back to 1919 at this point. So this really is a kind of a groundbreaking bourbon in a couple of historical reasons here. First, the Bloody Butcher corn as an heirloom species, and then second, as a production of a corn whiskey bourbon in Shelby County since Prohibition. By February of 2019, I believe, they had barreled 1,000 barrels of bourbon, and today they are up to 9 barrels a day. So obviously this is not a mass-produced product. This is what I'm going to call a boutique-style bourbon. Boutique-style bourbons. We've tasted several others on here before. Tonight, Jeptha Creed. So the mash bill for this bourbon is obviously 4 grains. So we've got Bloody Butcher corn, so about 70% corn, 15% malted rye, and 10% malted wheat, and then 5% malted barley. So this has some wheat in it, and I think that gives it some of the sweetness that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. It's aged 2 years, and I had a little trepidation about that when I started, but we're going to address that as well. And it's bottled at a very nice 98 proof. Now, you can tell from the appearance in the bottle here, I hope, and in the glass, it's actually a very beautiful red copper color. Very, very nice. I'm sure this is not a product of using red corn. It doesn't work like that. But it has a really beautiful red copper color. It also has what I think are very, very thick, sticky legs. They really hang on here. And it looks really, really great in the glass. But as we've talked on other episodes, it's not what it looks like, it's what it tastes like. So let's get into the tasting of Jeptha Creed. So first of all, the nose here. Corn's very obvious, so we're going to call this grain forward, but it is not like, shoving your nose down into a can of corn. That's not what I'm talking about. It's just a nice, healthy corn note. Follows with some sweetness, and I'm going to call it honey and butterscotch kind of mixed together here. And finally, there's a baking spice at the end. So this is very, very sweet and spicy, as I'm going to call it. It's a very balanced nose, sweet and spicy. And wow, that sweet and spicy really carries through onto the palate as well. Starts with some really sweet caramel right on the front. And then that spice kicks in. And I'm going to call it cinnamon. And that baking spice is still there. And it kicks in about mid-palate. Now, coming off the edges of the tongue, I'm getting a little citrus note. I'm going to call that orange, kind of like an orange peel. Doesn't distract me. I'm not a huge fan of orange, especially my bourbon. Does not distract, but it is a really neat, interesting note on there. But really, guys, this is a sweet and spicy drink. Boy, that front end, though, that's really, really honeyed caramel. And then that spice kicks in about that mid-tongue, like I said. It's really, really a fun drink in that respect. The finish, I'm going to call the finish medium. It doesn't last overly long, but it certainly lasts longer than others. You get a good linger oaky spice here in the back of the throat. It lasts for a good 10 seconds or so. Very, very nice on the finish. So my takeaway. This does not taste like a 2-year bourbon. In fact, I would go on record right now saying this is the best 2-year bourbon I've ever had. It tastes more like a 4 to 6 year. The alcohol is, for me, very, 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 very faint. It's barely noticeable. I really dig the sweet and spiciness of this pour. I think a drawback here, price-wise, I paid slightly north of $40 for this, and it's not available locally. I may have seen this once locally, but don't quote me on that. I did find this on a trip to Kentucky, so it's in our neighboring state. Can be had relatively easy for an hour and a quarter drive, but price and availability are going to hamper this unique pour. So what am I going to give this as a rating? I really enjoy this. I'm going to give this 4.25. I enjoy that sweet spiciness. I enjoy the craftsmanship of this boutique bourbon. Excuse me. Unlike some other boutique bourbons we've tried, they're not trying to cover up their flaws of their taste with needless heat and spice. This is, I think, deliberate on purpose. That sweetness is overpowering at the beginning. If you have a sweet tooth, that very beginning of that sip really hits you pretty good. I think what's going to hamper this is its price and availability. So I think that's where I'm going to get to 4.25 stars for Jeptha Creed, 4 grain, featuring the Bloody Butcher corn. Anyway, that's my take on Jeptha Creed, ladies and gentlemen. As always, stay safe, peace, and happy pours.